A discus book. A discus book. Cinderella, the original fairy tale. Illustrations by Paul Riley. Copyright information. Cinderella, the original fairy tale. Who?
Once upon a time, there was a gentleman who had a young daughter. She was kind, honest, and very pretty, like her mother. But when her mother died, the father took another woman for his second wife. This woman, who had 2 daughters of her own, thus became the young girl's stepmother. The stepmother was arrogant and proud, and her 2 daughters were exactly like her. As soon as the wedding was over, the stepmother began to insist that everything be done as she commanded, and so her poor husband was ruled by her in everything. His young daughter was such a kind and pretty girl, but her stepmother hated her because her own daughters were not nearly as pretty and were as arrogant and spiteful as she was. For this reason, the young girl was made to do all the worst chores. She had to clear the table, scour the pots and pans, and scrub the floors. Her stepmother and stepsisters had spacious bedrooms with lovely tiled floors, comfortable beds, and mirrors so large that they could see themselves from head to toe. But the poor girl had only a cold, dark room in the attic, and nothing but straw to sleep on. When she had done her work, She would sit beside the fireplace among the ashes and cinders, for her stepmother would not let her be seen elsewhere in the house in her ragged clothes. The elder stepsister therefore called her Cinder Wench, but the younger one, who was not so cruel, called her Cinderella. Both stepsisters loved to wear luxurious dresses and fine jewels in order to impress the nobility. But Cinderella, though she was dressed very poorly, was 100 times more beautiful than they. She never complained of her treatment to anyone, least of all to her father, who was completely governed by the wicked stepmother. One day, the king's son decided to give a ball, and invited to it all the wealthy and noble people of the realm. The stepsisters, too, were invited, for they were very well known as ladies of fashion. The two were so delighted by this invitation that all day long they could talk of nothing else but what they would wear to the ball, and what gowns, petticoats, and hats would be most becoming to them. "I will wear my red velvet suit with French lace," said the elder sister. "And I shall wear my ordinary petticoat," said the younger. "But to make up for it, I will put on my gold-flowered cloak and my diamond vest, which is anything but ordinary." All of this meant more work for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sister's linen. They also consulted her about what they should wear, for she had excellent taste and always gave them good advice. Cinderella was even so kind as to offer to dress their hair, a favor which they were glad to accept. As she was doing this, they said to her, "Cinderella, would you not be glad to be going to the ball?" "Alas," said she, "you only make fun of me. It is not for someone such as I am to go there." "You are right," they replied. "It would make people laugh to see a cinder wench at a ball." Anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their hair badly for such a mean remark. But she was not spiteful, and dressed their hair as well as she could. The sisters were constantly in front of their mirrors. They went almost 2 days without eating, and broke more than a dozen laces in trying to be laced up tight so that they would have a fine, slender figure. At last, the happy day came. The sisters rode off to the palace, and Cinderella watched them go. When she finally lost sight of them, she began to cry. Her godmother, who happened to see her in tears, asked her what was the matter. I wish I could. She was not able to say any more, being overcome by tears. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy, said to her, "You wish you could go to the ball, is it not so?" "Yes," cried Cinderella with a sigh. "Well," said her godmother, "be a good girl, and I will see to it that you go." Then she said to her, "Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella ran immediately to find the finest pumpkin she could and brought it to her godmother. But she could not imagine how this pumpkin could help her get to the ball. Her godmother scooped out the inside of it, leaving nothing but the rind. Then she struck it with a wand. The pumpkin was instantly turned into a fine coach, all covered with gold. Then she went to the mousetrap, where there were 6 live mice. She ordered Cinderella to lift up the trap door a little, and as each mouse went out, she gave it a little tap with her wand. Each mouse was instantly turned into a fine horse, which made a beautiful set of 6 horses in all, of a beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray. Then Cinderella said, "I will go and see if there is a rat in the rat trap. We may make a coachman of him." "Good idea," replied her godmother. "Go and look." Cinderella brought the trap to her. There were 3 huge rats inside. The fairy godmother chose the one with the longest whiskers, and in an instant she turned him into a fat, jolly coachman with the smartest whiskers you ever saw. "Go back into the garden," she said to Cinderella, "and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." As soon as Cinderella did this, her godmother turned them into 6 footmen with liveries of gold and silver. They all jumped up at once behind the coach and clung close together, as though they had done it their whole lives. The fairy godmother said, "Well now, here is a team fit to go to the ball with. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella. "But must I go there as I am, in these nasty rags?" Her godmother tapped her with her wand, and at once her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all sewn with jewels. Then she gave Cinderella a pair of beautiful glass slippers. As Cinderella got into her coach, her fairy godmother commanded her not to stay at the ball past midnight, for if she stayed 1 moment longer, the coach would become a pumpkin again, her horses would become mice, her coachman a rat, her footmen lizards, and her clothes just as they were before. Cinderella promised her godmother she would leave the ball before midnight. Then she drove away, barely able to contain herself for joy. When she arrived at the ball, word reached the king's son that a great princess had come, unknown to everyone. The prince ran out to receive her. As she stepped down from the coach, he gave her his hand and led her into the hall before all the guests. There was a profound silence. Everyone stopped dancing, and the violins ceased to play. Nothing was heard but whispers of, "How pretty she is! How pretty she is!" The king himself, although he was a very old man, could not help watching her. He told the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen such a lovely creature. All the ladies at the ball took careful note of her hair and clothes, intending to have some made just like them the next day, but only if they could get such fine materials and able hands to make them. The king's son led Cinderella to the seat of honor, and afterwards led her out to dance with him. She danced so gracefully that everyone admired her more and more. A fine meal was served, but the young prince was so busy looking at her that he could not eat a bite. Cinderella went and sat down next to her sisters, which greatly surprised them, for they did not recognize her. She was very gracious to them, offering them some of the oranges and lemons which the prince had given to her. While Cinderella was entertaining her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4. She immediately made a bow to the company and ran away as fast as she could. Coming home, she ran to find her godmother. She thanked her and said she wished she could go to the ball again the next day, for the king's son had invited her. Just as Cinderella was eagerly telling her godmother all that had happened at the ball, her two sisters knocked on the door. She ran and opened it. "How long you have been gone," she cried, yawning and rubbing her eyes as if she had just woken up. In truth, she had not wanted to sleep at all since they had left. "If you had been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "you would have wanted to stay as long. There came the most beautiful princess ever seen. She showed us many kindnesses and gave us oranges and lemons." Cinderella pretended not to care very much. She asked them the name of the princess, but they told her they did not know it. They also said that the king's son was very restless and would give anything to know who she was. At this, Cinderella smiled and said, "She must then be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been. How I would love to see her. Dear Miss Charlotte, lend me the yellow dress which you wear every day." "Indeed," cried Miss Charlotte, "lend my clothes to such a dirty cinder wench as you? I would be a fool." Cinderella had asked for it in jest, and indeed she expected such an answer and was very glad Miss Charlotte had refused. The next day the two sisters were again at the ball, and so was Cinderella. But she was dressed more magnificently than before. The king's son never left her side, and continually praised her beauty. Cinderella was so pleased by all of this that she forgot what her godmother had told her. She was sure it was no later than 11 when suddenly she heard the clock striking 12. She rose up and fled from the palace as quick as a deer, leaving behind one of her glass slippers. The prince ran after her, but could not catch her. He found the glass slipper and picked it up carefully. The guards at the palace gate were asked whether they had seen a princess go out. They said they had seen nobody but a young girl, very poorly dressed, who looked more like a poor country lass than a lady. When Cinderella got home, she was completely out of breath, and dressed again in her nasty old clothes, having nothing left but one of the little glass slippers matching the one she had lost. When the two sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them whether they had enjoyed themselves, and whether the beautiful lady had again been present. They told her the princess had been there indeed, but as soon as it struck 12, she had run away so quickly that she dropped one of her pretty glass slippers. The king's son, who had done nothing at the ball but look at her all the time, had picked it up. Most certainly, they told her, the king's son was in love with the beautiful creature who owned the glass slipper. What the sisters said was true, for a few days later, the king's son had it proclaimed with trumpets that he would marry the girl whose foot would fit this slipper. His servants began to try it on the princesses, the duchesses, and all the ladies of the court, but no one was found whose foot matched the glass slipper. It was then brought to Cinderella's stepsisters, who did all they could to squeeze their feet into the slipper. But it was impossible. Cinderella, who saw all this and recognized her slipper, laughed and said to them, "Let me see if it will fit me." Her sisters burst out laughing and began to tease her. The servant, who was sent with the slipper, looked carefully at Cinderella. Finding her very beautiful, he said he had orders to let everyone try, and so it was only just that she should attempt it. He asked Cinderella to sit down. Putting the slipper on her foot, he found it went on very easily and fitted her as if it had been made of wax. Her two sisters were much astonished, but even more so when she pulled out of her pocket the other slipper and put it on her foot. Then her godmother entered, and tapping Cinderella's clothes with her wand, made them more magnificent than any of those she had worn before. Now her two sisters knew that she was that beautiful lady whom they had met at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg her pardon for having treated her so badly. But Cinderella raised them up and embraced them. She said that she forgave them with all her heart and asked them to love her always. Cinderella was brought to the young prince, beautifully dressed as she was. He found her more charming than ever, and a few days later married her. Cinderella, who was both good and beautiful, gave her two sisters rooms in the palace and matched them with two great lords of the court.